warm welcome to everyone joining us today. This is a joint panel event between MindForward Alliance and KPMG. Our topic today is mental health in a multi-generational workforce, and we have a very interesting set of panelists who will introduce themselves shortly. A few words about MindForward Alliance. MindForward Alliance is a leading global nonprofit transforming workplace culture to one that supports the mental health of employees. We provide best practices and offer a range of tools and consultative services to support organizations globally. I'm joined by my fellow moderator, John Stone from KPMG. So let's begin with some introductions. Since I'm talking, I'm Kumar Kymal, Chair of MindForward Alliance USA, and have worked as the Global Head of Reward in a number of large multinationals, where I have been responsible for designing and supporting mental health programs to support and transform the workplace culture. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Kumar. Hi, everyone. My name is John Stone. I'm a managing director in the Global Mobility Services practice at KPMG. During my day job, I focus on employee taxation, but one of my passions is mental health. And within KPMG, I sit on the mental health task force, and I'm also on the strategic committee of the U.S. MindForward Alliance.
Great. Thanks, John. I'm looking forward to co-moderating with you. Before we go to the panelists, let me set some context for our event today. So today, we'll delve into the intriguing dynamics of the four generations present in today's workforce: Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, and baby boomers. This session is particularly significant as we explore how their varying attitudes, experiences, and perspectives impact mental health and well-being in the workplace. There's been considerable research about the differences between these generations in the last decade. MindForward Alliance has most recently conducted and published research on mental health in the workplace, highlighting some of these distinctions. Our aim today is to share this research, engage in some cross-generational debate, help bridge generational gaps, and reflect on what this may mean for employers. We are very privileged to have four distinguished panelists who are representing different generations and bring a wealth of experiences and insights to this topic. So let me now ask each panelist to introduce themselves and say a few words about themselves. Over to you, Oona.
Thanks so much, Kumar and John. It's great to see everybody. And as I said, my name is Oona Ryle. I'm the Gen Z panelist, and I'm currently an associate at Girls Who Invest. We're a nonprofit working to increase the representation of women and non-binary folk in investment management. I've had a bit of a unique background. So prior to working at Girls Who Invest, I worked at Goldman Sachs for 3 years, where I was working to build a retail business. And prior to that, I worked on political campaigns. And so throughout, I've been very passionate about advocacy and wellness. And what really draws me to this panel today and speaking to all of you is that I really believe mental health is just as important as physical health. Having struggled with it throughout college, having seen friends struggle with it, I know we all work really hard to understand how to improve it and how to bring our best selves to work every day.
Thanks, Oona. Hallie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hallie Shepps, and I am representing the millennial population. And I am an associate director at KPMG. I've been at the firm for about 3 years now. And I'm in a unique position at the firm where I focus specifically on our well-being benefits. So I sit within our talent and culture organization, and I really focus on implementing mental health strategies and well-being programs so that we can improve the stress and reduce burnout among our population. So I'm really excited today to talk about mental health. It's something that I'm definitely passionate about in my own life, but also I work so closely with it in my day-to-day job at KPMG. So excited to have this conversation.
Thanks, Hallie. Christian?
Thank you very much, Kumar. I'm Christian Athanasoulas. I'm a tax partner at KPMG. I've been in the professional service industry for about 30 years, the last 25 here at KPMG, where I play a couple of different roles. I am the partner in charge of M&A and international tax for KPMG globally, and I'm partner in charge of tax services for our U.S. business. I am one of our Gen X panelists today, and this is an incredibly important subject matter to me from both a professional perspective and a personal perspective. Professionally, I've had many opportunities to engage with colleagues around this particular topic, and from a personal perspective, I am the father of 3 teenagers, one of whom is a transgender teenager who, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, has struggled with mental health and have been his advocate and learned a lot about the subject matter through that experience.
Thank you, Christian. And Jeanette.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeanette Boot. I am a partner at Wilmer, Hale in the firm's New York office. I've been at the firm as a partner for 18 years and out of law school for almost 30 years. So I'm also a Gen Xer, along with Christian. And I am here for a couple of reasons. One is in my professional capacity for the past 6 years, I've headed up the firm's wellbeing working group. The legal industry may have been a little slow to the party, but we have recognized that mental health and well-being is something that is important to maintain our competence, professionality, collegiality, and overall health in the profession. I'm also active on the American Bar Association's committee that administers what's called the Wellbeing Pledge in the legal profession. So it's something that I care about professionally. I also, as I think most people, have had my own personal brushes with mental health issues, both me personally and my family members. And I think as the parent of 3 Gen Zers, I also, like Christian, have seen firsthand the struggles of that generation. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Jeanette. A big thank you, Oona, Hallie, Christian, and Jeanette. I think, as you can see, we have a very impressive group of panelists. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. So a little bit of the format of how we're going to approach this. As I said earlier, we have some data from research. And what we are going to do is we'll share some research, and then we'll go into questions for the panelists. Then we'll share research again. So we'll kind of go back and forth between data and the questions we're going to ask the panelists. And what we're going to start with is actually just setting the scene a little bit. And both myself and John will provide a little bit of background. I'll provide an overview of, the generations, demographic information, and from a U.S. and a global perspective. And then John is going to talk a little bit about generations from a KPMG perspective, since we are presenting this. So if we can put up slide 2, that would be great. Okay, so as I said, here we're presenting an overview of the different generations. Now, I'm not going to go through and read every line and every data point. I'm just going to provide some overarching comments. So there's an overview of the generations showing the proportions in the U.S. population, the U.S. workforce, and in the global populations as well. And a few points to make. Millennials are both the largest proportion of the U.S. population and the largest proportion of the U.S. workforce at 36%. However, as you can see, Gen Z already makes up a significant proportion of the workforce, roughly equal in the U.S. to the proportion of baby boomers. And actually, Gen Z are expected to exceed baby boomers some point in 2025. So to support a conversation today, we will be sharing, as I said, some research carried out by MindForward Alliance that shines a light on the different perspectives and experiences regarding mental health in the 4 generations. And you can see the proportion of respondees that responded to the survey that we've done. We're showing both U.S. respondees as well as the global respondees as well, and mostly presenting US specific data today. All right, let me hand it over to you, John, to the next slide.
Thanks, Kumar. So moving to slide 3, which you're now seeing. As Kumar just said, everything that we're presenting today was compiled by the MindForward Alliance. So given that, we really wanted to put this panel discussion into a little more context for the KPMG attendees. And honestly, this really shouldn't be a surprise to anybody from KPMG. Gen Z is growing through the ranks year by year. And with every class of new hire associates and retiring partners, there's a natural shift in the amount of baby boomers and Gen Xers we have that are going out of the workforce and retiring against the growing population of Gen Z. So as you can see, we have the Gen Z employees growing from 4% to 28% of our population over the last 5 years, with a very similar shift in the opposite direction, having the baby boomers retiring as they're leaving the workforce. Now I'm going to turn it back to Kumar to go through another set of data from the MindForward Alliance.
Great. Thank you, John. All right, let's go to the next slide, slide 4. And this slide is presenting data on the personal mental health experiences and concerns across the generations. And you'll see there are 2 charts here. The chart on the left side indicates a decreasing pattern from Gen Z to the boomers, where Gen Z have experienced and continue to experience the most mental health challenges. On the right side, you'll see that there's a similar decreasing pattern as the generation transitions again from Gen Z to baby boomers. And this is across a whole variety of topics, including the personal concerns about mental health, whether they've discussed mental health challenges with their manager, or how they rate their mental health. For example, roughly 60% of Gen Z have experienced stress in the last month, while only 35% of baby boomers have. Okay, let me now turn it over back to John to go into some of the questions.
I feel like this data is very interesting because it seems to indicate that Gen Z has more experiences and are more concerned about mental health issues than any of the other generations. So given that, I want to have a KPMG and an external panelist share some experience on this. So Christian, I'll ask you to go first, and then Oona, I'll ask you to also respond. So 2-pronged question to you both. First, are these figures consistent with your experiences? And then second, what context can you give as to why that may or may not be the case?
Sure. Thank you, John. And the figures are certainly very interesting and frankly, not a surprise to me, very much consistent with what I would have expected. And as I try to think through why I'm not surprised by them, a few things come to mind. First, I do think that certain generations have sort of lived through times and have experiences that bring mental health to the forefront, just in terms of things that they're thinking about. I think as it relates to some of the generations in the workforce who've grown up with things like social media, that can be a contributor potentially to mental health challenges and mental health struggles. But perhaps more importantly, John, I think this may be a situation where different generations have different views in terms of how to communicate, whether to communicate mental health challenges. And it very well may be the case that for certain generations, even if one is experiencing a mental health challenge or has a family member who's contending with some mental health issues, it's not something they feel comfortable talking about, disclosing it, even in an anonymous survey like this. Whereas in other generations, there may just be more comfort in acknowledging it, in talking about it, and other generations have sort of grown up in a world in which there was no stigma. It was very much accepted, very much acknowledged, and to the point that Oona made earlier, sort of treated potentially no differently than a physical health element. You trip and you hurt your wrist. You're willing to talk about that. You're equally willing to talk about some of these other challenges that you may have. So I'd attribute it to both of those, John.
That's pretty fascinating. It's good to hear from somebody in a leadership position that's also seen the evolution of the workforce and the generations. So Oona, to you, given that you are representing Gen Z, what are your takes on this?
Echoing a lot of things that Christian said, I also wasn't surprised by the figures. And one thing that also jumped to my mind was I do think different generations have different ways of communicating mental health challenges. But kind of underlying that, I think various generations have completely different ways that they understand or can categorize what a mental health challenge is. And I think Gen Z specifically has a broader definition. That's in part because we did grow up by social media, we were shaped by social media, and words like anxiety and depression are thrown around every single day. If I open Instagram or any app, it's pretty much guaranteed that I'll see them. And so I think with that broadened definition, those figures might reflect a higher amount of challenge that might have not have been thought of in the past.
But it's fascinating to me that we have two different generations that are seeing the same things and experiencing the same things. So great insight from you both. Really appreciate it. I think, Kumar, we're ready to go to the next set of data.
Great. Thank you, John. Yeah, great. A great conversation. All right. So I am going to go through two slides here, and the first one I seem to have lost. There we go. Apologies. I'm first going to talk about personal experiences at work, and then go into the next question, which is on workers' perspectives on mental health. Okay, so this slide is talking about the chart is about personal experiences that the individuals had in the last month. Now, we are again seeing a repetitive pattern from Gen Z to the boomers. Their personal experiences are reflecting the impact of mental health challenges, going again from, high to low. The personal experience will reflect the mental health challenges like less productivity or a desire to quit or focusing on burnout symptoms, which are really the definition of lack of interest, motivation, or energy. And you see that while Gen Z tend to be impacted the most, the numbers are still relatively high for millennials and Gen X, and boomers tend to be markedly lower across all of the areas. So for example, when we look at burnout symptoms, which is the interest, motivation, and energy or lack of, they're close to 50% for Gen Z and Gen X, and Gen Y are, the Gen Y at 38%, and boomers are at 28%. So quite a big gap to the boomers. Now let's go to the next. Let's go to the next slide, and this is about workers' perspectives on workplace mental health. Now it's intriguing that we continue to find the same pattern across a range of different questions, right? So Gen Z, you'll see, is the highest, the most positive and open, followed by the millennials, then Gen X, and the boomers seem to have the least interest or awareness about mental health at work. Or you could say maybe they're closer, unaware of the issues and topics. So this is the consistent pattern on various questions on whether mental health is a high priority for employers, whether the culture is open, whether there's stigma in the workplace, or even whether the leader talks about it. Now, since all the generations are in the same workplace, perhaps it's fair to ask the question, is this about their perspectives, perception, or is this reality? Anyway, let me now shift to some panel questions. So the first one is for you, Jeanette. How do you interpret this repetitive pattern? I mean, do you think it's a reflection of their, each generation's experiences, or is it more related to their attitudes about mental health? What do you think?
So I guess I kind of bring it back to the conversation Oona and Christian were having around definitional questions and questions of how people communicate. So I agree with Oona that I think part of what's going on here is that the generations like baby boomers and Gen X have more narrow definitions of what a mental health concern actually is, just definitionally, and are probably, I think less knowledgeable. Because to Oona's point, we aren't necessarily on social media and kind of staying on top of all of the trends. The other thing that I was thinking about, though, particularly with the second slide that you showed, is that these people presumably are working more or less in the same place, right? So there is an objective answer to some of these questions, like, does the employer say something, for example? Have people had discussions? Those are objective questions. And I find it fascinating that the answers are so different. And I think part of it is probably just that some of the later generations are more in tune and actually paying attention. But it does make me wonder, because the people in charge are most likely the baby boomers and Gen X. And if they don't think that their employers care, then maybe they're saying they don't care.
Very, very interesting and provocative, and I think points and reflections from you, Jeanette. Thank you for that. I have a question for you, Hallie. When you when you look at the data here that that I presented, Gen Z tend to be the most negative about their mental health, or have the highest desire to quit, or with burnout symptoms. So, question for you is, how do you think sort of older generations, the boomers or the Gen X, can support their colleagues, from the younger generations? What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, first, I agree with everything that everyone's been saying about how Gen Z is probably more open and attuned to their mental health, which is why we're seeing higher levels of self-reported mental health concerns with them. But putting that aside, if we're assuming that older generations are in more senior positions, there are definitely a couple of ways that they can support their Gen Z colleagues or counselees. I would say the first thing is around fostering open dialogue and creating an environment that encourages open discussions about mental health. By being vulnerable and sharing your own experiences and challenges, it can help make the younger generation feel more comfortable and willing to open up. And if they don't see members of their team or senior leaders being open and talking about these types of issues, they're not going to feel like they can either. So really having that open communication is helpful to that population. And then similarly, I would say that role modeling healthy behaviors is another really great way to support younger colleagues. So doing things like taking time off and actually disconnecting when you're taking time off and not responding to emails and taking that time to unplug can model really good behaviors for the Gen Z population. If they're seeing their senior leaders do that, they know that they can do that too. But if they don't see that, they might not feel that permission to be able to take the time off, which is really important for their burnout. And then also even saying things like, oh, I need to go take a walk and clear my head, or tomorrow I'm taking a mental health day. Those things can help demonstrate that it's okay to prioritize your mental health. So that's something that we're always trying to do at KPMG, is get leaders to understand, how to communicate this and how to talk about their own mental health. And then, one last thing I'll mention, we've talked about how boomers and Gen Z might not be as aware of mental health and might not have the same language. So I think it's really important for some of the older generations and senior leaders to make sure that they educate themselves on what burnout is, what the signs and symptoms are, so that they can notice if it's happening. If they don't know what it is, they might not be able to spot it if it's happening with one of their colleagues. So it's really important just to be aware and understand, hey, this is what burnout looks like. Maybe I need to support.
Hallie, what a rich set of points you've made. I think you've given so many points that the Gen Z, Gen X, and Boomers can really take on board, reflect and try to practice. So I think really, really useful advice. Let me now go to the next slide to share a little bit about the reasons. So there's two charts here. The chart on the left side are the reasons why employees are not speaking to their manager, and the results actually make clear there's actually fear consistently across generations that managers won't keep mental health concerns confidential, and perhaps surprisingly, that employees would lose their job for disclosing mental health challenges or potentially even not get promoted. I also found it interesting that all four generations are actually similar in their desire to keep mental health private. And if you look at the numbers, for example, all four generations are lumped pretty closely together between 50 to 60%. Now let's look at the chart on the right side. And this is about whether individuals have had training or skills to support conversations on mental health. So on this question, actually both Gen Z and millennials are both reasonably high and reflect that they've had more training, are more confident to discuss mental health issues, and believe their managers are well equipped to have conversations support. Well, you see that it seems that the Gen X and Boomers generally tend to lag, and obviously and Boomers tend to lag the most. But it seems like both the Gen X and Boomers tend to lag, quite a bit from the Gen Z and the millennials. All right, why don't we now transition to some questions? Over to you, John.
Yeah, before we do so, one of the things I just want to point out, after Jeanette's comment before, I do find it interesting because you would expect that the Gen X and the Boomers to be the managers that people come to talk about, but they're saying there's no privacy. Yet they're also the ones that would have a hand in setting some of these policies for people to have conversations. So there seems to be a bit of a dichotomy in how to dissect that information. But all that being said, Oona, I want to go to you first for a question. So representing Gen Z, do you think that Gen Z really does have more training and are given the skills necessary to discuss mental health challenges with a colleague? Or is this really just more of a perception because Gen Z seems to be more in tune with mental health than any of the other generations?
Great question. I think it's not just a perception. I know that starting as early as, I think, early high school, conversations around what does it mean to be healthy started to include things like, well, mentally healthy as well. And then fast forwarding to entering the workforce, I remember in my analyst training, we had a session on mental health and it wasn't optional. Whereas I think for like millennials, Gen X, boomers, it might have been optional at some point or another. So I think that difference in itself already says, yes, we've had more training. I think there's also a lot of information out there that isn't necessarily education, but it still allows Gen Z to feel more comfortable talking about things in the workplace. And that could be things like a get ready with me video. And they have titles like, come get ready with me as a corporate girl, getting ready for my 9 to 5. And I see those a lot, and they reference mental health throughout. They talk about what they do to keep themselves healthy. And so I think those are really interesting too. So there is a lot of training and there is a lot of information available, but I would make a distinction between the two.
And just hearing that, the one word I would use is inspiring. There are methodologies out there that inspire others to talk about, just in hearing what you're saying. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Gen Z can play a pretty big role in opening the conversation. I think it's definitely up to managers to create space for it, like what Hallie was saying earlier. But I also think there are appropriate ways where Gen Z can encourage some of their peers, maybe in a reverse mentorship program or just with their mentors in general, to say, there's a way to talk about this. There's a way to relate to one another through talking about this. But again, I think it has to be balanced.
and that's a great insight to that. And that actually leads to a good question for Christian, because one of the ways that you can kind of start opening doors is reducing stigma, right? So Christian, from your experience, what are some practices that may help reduce the stigma associated with mental health in the workplace?
So it's a great question, John, and a lot of what Oona just said really resonates with me around educating folks across all generations. And I will readily acknowledge here that boomers and Gen X did not grow up with this type of training. It's not muscle memory. We don't all have the vocabulary that's required to respond appropriately in a way that will help reduce stigma. So again, I think part of it's around education and making sure we understand the vocabulary. But I would say the most impactful thing that can be done to reduce stigma is to be vulnerable. You know, as a leader, as a member of Gen X, to the extent someone comes to me and has a concern, a mental health concern, if I'm willing to sort of open up and share and acknowledge what they're going through and make them feel comfortable, I'm not the only one going through this. Look, my more senior boss is sharing with me that, you know, he and others at his level have contended with similar issues. It really results in everyone feeling more comfortable talking about it, and it can be really hard to sort of open yourself up and to be vulnerable. But I do think that again, the most impactful thing we can do, other than education and sharing the vocabulary, is make sure that senior folks in organizations, leaders, are very much comfortable sharing their own experiences, because that will be disarming and be just incredibly impactful at reducing stigma.
And Christian, just to point out that you're leading by example right now with how you led with your own personal examples, especially with your teenage your teenager, and that does help disarm a lot of it. And Hallie, just on that note, sticking within KPMG, as in your role, I know that this is very near and dear to you, but how do you end up giving our employees the tools necessary to both open up and have these conversations as someone that may be struggling? And then on the flip side, give managers the ability to listen and have these conversations with employees.
Yeah, so I think really similar to what Christian was sharing, we try at the firm-wide level to reduce the stigma of mental health and to normalize the conversation around mental health topics. That's something we consistently include in our communication campaigns. We offer a variety of mental health benefits, and we host a lot of events throughout the year that highlight different mental health stories. And we do all of this so that we can create a psychologically safe environment where people feel like they can reach out and they feel like, okay, it's okay to be talking about these things at KPMG. So we really try and tackle the employee feeling comfortable by making it known that it's something that we care about as a firm and encouraging folks to do so. And then, on the opposite side for training managers, that's actually a big priority for us right now on my team. And we're working on, how do we improve and enhance the manager mental health training that we currently offer. We did a mental well-being research study a couple of years ago, and we found that a key indicator of well-being was whether employees felt like they had support from their manager. So that's why we're really, focused on improving that right now. We're looking into different in-person trainings and courses that we can conduct to try and give managers those skills so that they know how to have the conversations. And, if an employee does come to them, they can feel like they are confident in being able to support them. I'll also say that we do offer a few benefits that have manager consultation lines. So a manager can call into that resource and ask them if they have any questions about, a specific challenge that they might be experiencing with an employee, or, if they want to talk something through and get advice. I will say, though, it's an underutilized resource. So we want to try and promote that more, because it really can be valuable for managers, because they can get that one-on-one support and really, tackle the issue with them and figure out, how can I support this employee?
Hallie, I mean, it's fantastic. And it's good to hear the growth that KPMG has had. I've seen it myself over the last few years. But I do think that this also now adds a lot of credence to, Kumar, what you're about to share when we start talking about having well-equipped managers and leaders to handle these discussions.
Thanks, John. I just have to say that I'm really impressed hearing about KPMG's practices. It really sounds like your approach is sort of best in class in terms of some of the things that you do. So kudos to you guys on the work that you do. All right. So look, I want to share a little bit about the key role of leaders and managers. And I'll just say that those of you in the audience who may be in some way responsible for well-being in the workforce, this is the one slide that you really want to pay close attention to in terms of the data I'm going to share in a minute. So, so look, what does the data say? It's really clear that when you have well-equipped managers and leaders speaking about mental health, that there's a significant positive impact on employees and on employers. So the outcomes are really quite important for organizations to recognize. So when a leader speaks out, employee perceptions of whether an organization cares increases significantly to 89%. So it's up 40%. And there's also a market impact on stigma, with 71% of employees willing to speak to their manager about their own mental health challenges. These are dramatic numbers. And then when a manager is well equipped and speaks out, there's a significant impact on reducing burnout symptoms from 53% to 33%. And the desire to quit also reduces substantially if either a leader or a manager speaks out on mental health issues, down to 23%. So really important data sets, and in terms of the the impact that managers and leaders have. So let me now maybe shift to some questions. As I said, there's a significant impact when managers and leaders speak out about mental health. Yet, when you look at the data, it appears that only 40% of organizational leaders speak out about mental health issues. Now, KPMG is part of the 40%. And so, Christian, really, this question is for you. Can you talk about your experiences about both the approach and impact of speaking out about mental health related issues at KPMG?
Sure, Kumar, and I'm certainly incredibly proud of the fact that we are among the 40% of employers that regularly speak out and equip our leaders and managers to have these conversations. It's just incredibly important. We are a professional services organization. Our most important asset is our people. We care about the health and wellness of our people, whether it's physical health or mental health. So we just need to lead in a way that is consistent with that core value of ours. And so it's absolutely the right thing to do. The other thing I will acknowledge, and the statistics and the data that you just showed reflected, is it's also a business imperative, right? We are in an environment where it's really hard to find qualified, talented people, to develop them, to train them, to deploy them in ways that are fulfilling for them. And to the extent that we don't take steps and actions to ensure that we're appropriately addressing the mental health needs of our people, we're going to lose that very important professional that is key to our success. So it's the right thing to do. It's a business imperative. We are regularly thinking about different ways that we can lean into this, and this webcast that we're doing today is certainly one of them. And I think our people have lots and lots of things on their to-do lists every day. And it would be very easy for something like this to sort of fall off or slip to the bottom. And as leaders in the organization, we just need to make sure that we're continually finding appropriate opportunities to speak to this, to train people, to educate, to listen, to make sure that we are we're helping to identify situations before they reach a more critical juncture. But we just again, it's one of these things where you need to be relentless just in your focus on it, for fear that it will otherwise slip to the bottom of the list. So that's what we're doing, Kumar.
Great, Christian, thank you so much for sharing. And I also think that you hit on a few things that talk about even a broader impact it has in the organization around speaking out, which is it's good for business, It's also good for getting the, supporting your talent and making the organization also attractive for the next generation who want to join you, right? So I think you're actually highlighting some of the added benefits that employers have to focus on well-being, in addition to the things that I presented in the slide. I just want to ask Hallie, as a well-being leader, is there anything else you'd want to add to Christian's comments?
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I'll add is that, we're constantly doing mental health events throughout the year, and we do focus on different mental health topics. So, we do substance use awareness, suicide awareness, and we always try and include senior leaders in those conversations, and senior leaders from, different functions, from different areas of different demographics, so that we're trying to reach more people and, really showcase this is a top-down approach and that all of our leaders, are on board with it. So instead of just continuously having the same HR folks do the presentations, we're always looking for different leaders to share their stories.
Great. Thank you, Hallie, for sharing. I want to shift the question a little bit and to you, Jeanette. So I guess in a way I have a two-pronged question for you. We can also see, from the data that there sometimes is a reluctance for leaders to speak out, or you can say leaders or managers. And I'd love to get your perspective on, why do you think that is? And secondly, I also would appreciate if you could share a little bit about what are the type of practices that you're seeing across the legal industry.
Sure. So, reluctance to speak out. This is one that I find terribly frustrating and confounding, especially in light of the data that you presented, right? I mean, it feels like this should be a no-brainer, but I think some of what keeps leaders from speaking out is the perception that if they do speak out, that it will somehow give permission to their employees to slack off, right? To not be all in, to not be willing to put in hours, etc., right? And, I think that perception is there. And I think part of why it's there is that, we were not free to talk about any of these things. And certainly we're not free to, say things like, and I recall this from my early years, I have a birthday party I want to go to. Well, too bad, that was definitely the attitude in the workplace when I was coming up. And I think there's a view that if we want people to be hardworking, if we want people to be committed, we can't give them permission to actually take care of themselves. I think the data belie this. I think, again, even if all you care about is dollars, cents, that sort of thing, business development, it's foolish because the people who are coming up have an expectation that their leaders will care and do care about mental health, and they can vote with their feet. So I think that's my 2 cents. In terms of practices, though, and on the more positive side, I would say, there is a lot of new stuff that's happening. And, again, sort of hearkening back to when I was a junior associate, mental health was not even a thing, right? It was not in anyone's vocabulary. And to the extent that people did have any kinds of issues, there was no way anyone would speak about it. And that's changed. That has changed dramatically. And I think, for newer entrants to the workplace, they weren't there, so they didn't see it. But it's something that, there's just an expectation across the board that people will at least say that they care about mental health and provide real resources. The other thing in terms of practices, I think there are a couple things I would say here. One is that there is more training for leaders. I would agree with Oona that there's not mandatory training in general, or it's not necessarily something that everyone attends. But I know, for example, here that we have had leadership training around well-being, and the sort of talk about it. So that is something that's happening. And I think the other thing is just an attention to smaller demographic groups, not being so kind of overarching and generic, but really, focusing on the specific needs, for example, of parents with children, or of, different affinity groups, or that sort of thing, and different ways that people need to access mental health in a way that's comfortable for them. So it's not hopeless.
I love that, Jeanette. I love that. By the way, I somehow lost I think a minute in between what you're talking, but I want to at least play back a couple of things that really stood out for me anyway, and what you said. When you talked about the reluctance of leaders, I think you're really stressing that to a degree there's potentially a cultural issue that could exist in organizations, or that people have their own sort of inbuilt experiences that they bring to the table that maybe holds them back from leaning in sort of to the issue. But then on the positive side, what you're emphasizing, and things have changed a lot, and the expectations have changed as well as to what are focused on, and what organizations expect of people and leaders. So that's the very positive takeaway from I think for me from the comments that you made. So let me shift to a question for you, Oona. Again, the data really is focusing on that equipping of managers and the importance of leaders talking about mental health, and that it has a really big impact on organizations. What do you think are the implications for employers, and how do you think that this information should shape the programs that employers offer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the implications for employers are really around like retention. One of the things I think someone mentioned earlier is that you vote with your feet. Jeanette, maybe you mentioned that. And I think there is this perception that Gen Z is flighty and there's a lack of loyalty and things like that. But we're dealing with something that every generation has faced before us, which is we don't know what we're doing with our lives necessarily, and we're figuring it out along the way. And so I think what that requires is a lot of patience, buy-in from leadership. What Christian said, just having leaders be open and vulnerable. And that does look like training. So 51% of organizations or respondents say their organizations have training, their managers do. That's wonderful. I want the other 49% to have training too. And then what Hallie was saying earlier, just that how KPMG has been using education to evolve trainings. I think that's pretty incredible, because no one training can fit every manager. But giving them the resources to be able to talk to their employees about it is amazing. And then I think additionally, just an openness to realizing that, your employee who might be white is facing very different mental health problems than a Black or Brown employee, or a queer employee, or neurodivergent. And so recognizing and celebrating the differences, but also being open to hearing about them and the challenges are equally important.
Great, thank you, Oona. You've given a great set of topics and areas that employers need to focus on. So very much appreciate that. Thank you. John, let me hand it over to you. I think we do have time maybe for one or two wrap up questions for the panel.
Yeah, and actually, I have one question that I kind of want to pose to everybody. So anyone feel free to jump in here, but everybody's had a different experience, and just listening to everybody has a very unique take on everything. Whoever wants to go first can go first. If you had word of advice that you'd give to an employer, employees, or just managers that around this entire topic, what would it be?
I can chime in first. So I think the most helpful thing that people can do is checking in. When we did that mental well-being research project I mentioned before, we did a focus group, a digital focus group. And the number one thing that came out of that was around employees saying that they feel most supported when their manager checks in with them, whether or not it's a formal check-in or a casual check-in, or it doesn't matter how long the check-in, but just being able to say, like, how are you doing? What's going on? And just having that sort of touch point can open the conversation up to larger things. So I would say just check in. If you haven't talked to someone in a while, just, make sure that they're doing okay.
Well, that's great, Hallie. Christian, it looks like.
Sorry, sorry, I put it on mute. I'll jump in. I was going to say something actually very similar to what Hallie just said, so maybe I'll just echo and reinforce what she said. The word I was going to use is listen. Ask questions and listen, and sort of recognize that when you're asking that question and you're checking in, someone may not immediately feel comfortable sharing, but there may be things that you hear that raise your antenna, or could raise your antenna and cause you to ask that follow-up question, which may be presented in a way that allows the person to feel more comfortable sharing. So I would just say, be a good listener.
Christian, just on that, one word I would use is authentic, right? Be authentic as a listener.
Absolutely, John.
And I'll chime in. I don't just have one word, but I do have one word. The one word is grace. Grace. And I'll spell that out a little more with a slogan. Assume positive intent. And another slogan, because I love slogans, be curious, not furious. And these are things I've learned along the way, all coming down really to grace, which is also a form of curiosity, right? We all need to not be so hard on each other, not be so judgmental. Be willing to have a conversation and not assume that the person on the other side of the video screen or across your desk is behaving the way they are because they're stupid, they're lazy, they're unmotivated. Or, on the flip side, they don't care, they're old, they don't understand, whatever. I'm making a mockery of what Gen Z might think.
I was going to say, Jeanette, you're channeling your best Ted Lasso here. I don't know if others watch that program, but that's what I'm thinking of as you're walking through this.
I love Ted Lasso. That was the perfect pandemic show, I must say. But yeah, that's my recommendation.
That's great, Jeanette. Thank you.
I really love that. Yeah, my two words are patient and curiosity. So borrowing from you, Jeanette, and also I think grace is really important. So often I know that for a lot of my friends, our friendships are everybody's around our age. And so sometimes at work, that's the only place where you'll get to talk about social lives or just, what challenges people, what motivates them. For different generations. And so I think that's something we should absolutely lean into, whether it's asking a mentor or a coworker about, different like pivotal career moments, or just asking them what they did over the weekend, like check-ins, figuring out what make people tick. I think those intergenerational relationships can be a really, really powerful mechanism for getting everyone to feel on the same page and comfortable bringing their whole selves to work.
I think just hearing you and like putting that with everybody else, it's all about togetherness, right? We're all in it together and encouraging each other to be better and talk about it. So I know that we're coming up on time, so I want to be mindful of everyone's schedule. But before I turn it over to you, Kumar, I just want to thank the panelists, all of you, for joining. Kumar, I want to thank you for having me here as a co-panelist with you. It's been a pleasure sharing the podium with you. And I also want to thank you because without you and without you bringing this information from the MindForward Alliance, we wouldn't be able to have such a detailed conversation around this. And I hope that, like me, everybody else at KPMG that's watching this was able to take something away from this and learn and bring this to make them a better employee, a better manager, or even in their personal life, just make them a better person when it comes to this space. So, Kumar, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your very generous comments. So look, I'm going to bring this insightful discussion to close. I have to say, I learned a lot actually listening, hearing the conversation, the feedback along the way, and definitely had a smile or two along the way as well with some of the comments. So thank you all for your openness and sharing. So real big thanks to our distinguished panelists for sharing their perspectives on mental health from a generational, standpoint. Obviously, we heard a lot of diverse viewpoints that really, I think, enriched sort of our understanding. We've gotten a better idea for what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities that each generation faces in the workplace. We also, I think, talked about the importance of fostering a more supportive and inclusive environment, and everybody's coming, into the workplace with different set of, experiences and different set of perspectives. And so I think key here is that bridging the generational gaps is about the engaging in the open dialogue. We had closing comments about the check-in and listening, patience, grace. I think all those things are really critical. And also appreciating each other's differences, because I think doing that creates a much healthier and a more harmonious workplace for everybody. So I think the insights really definitely contribute to also shaping strategies and practices for employers. So again, thank you again, all of you, for your active participation and thoughtful contributions, and to the audience for spending time and listening to our great set of panelists. Thank you.